This is Friday the 13th. We're here at the White House. What a week. Lalit?
Yeah, it's a big week. It's what the start of the new year, right? Tell us what's happening on the big news of the week.
Well, here at the White House, we know about the document scandal, which is very inconvenient politically for President Biden, because after all, he had already said that former President Trump's handling of documents was sloppy. And now all of a sudden, it turns out not only that there was this one tranche of documents over at the former Penn Biden office down at 101 Constitution Avenue, but now also at his Delaware house, not one but two locations.
What political implications is going to have?
Politically, this is very difficult. You know, there are, on the face of it, we don't really know what's happening until Special Counsel Robert Hur really has a chance to examine what actually happened. So we're just opining without that kind of epistemological knowledge of what's going on. However, I mean, we do know that former President Trump stonewalled and he fought, and his lawyers signed affidavits saying that all the classified material had been returned, which turned out to be false. Meanwhile, President Biden's team, his lawyers, when they discovered the documents, they immediately notified the National Archives, and they were returned. However, it is still politically inconvenient. I mean, the American public may look at it and say, if a normal State Department employee were to take home SCI top secret documents, they might face prosecution if there was intent. I mean, that's a big issue here, is intent, and that's what the special counsel will be looking into. Are there two standards of justice going on? And for Democrats, this is politically so inconvenient. Biden has given a huge gift to the new House Republican majority, Jim Jordan and Comer and others, to investigate him.
So tell me, one question that rises now here. The documents were discovered about a week before or 6 days before the elections were held, right?
Right.
The White House came to know about it immediately. The president was notified immediately. Why it was not informed to the general public?
That is the big question. Of course, we at the White House are wondering that. Peter Doocy asked, you know, what were you thinking? Using the same phraseology that President Biden had used on former President Trump. What were you thinking? And of course, why weren't we told? I mean, on Tuesday, when President Biden had his press conference in Mexico City, he didn't mention that on December 20th, that other documents had already been discovered at his house. He had indicated, he didn't say explicitly, but he had indicated that there was just this one tranche of 10 documents at his former office. But now there turns out to be more, which is very frustrating for the press.
So not revealing to the people of the country on November 2nd or 3rd where the documents were that they have been found from the office, private office of the Vice President. Was that decision taken, was it an oversight, or this was done on purpose, that the election is coming, it might have an implication on the elections?
We don't know. That's the question. We do not know whether there was oversight, whether there was sloppiness. People I've talked to who are expert on classified material say it's not unusual for documents to turn up. If you're working with a lot of classified material, for something to turn up, the normal protocol is you call up the National Archives. The National Archives calls the Justice Department, and the documents are returned. Unless there was intent, unless you meant to steal those documents or take them from the National Archives. I can think of when Bill Richardson had spirited some documents from the National Archives, and he faced legal indications. This is welcome. We have the truck here from the White House. It's a working environment, the White House is.
Certainly, these are not full of documents, these are full of furniture.
That's right. And, you know, because of course, yes, that's right.
Okay, so tell me, do you have any idea, any indication what is inside those documents? What could be there?
Rumors are that they have something to do with foreign affairs. Of course, as vice president, Biden had been working on issues with Ukraine, and of course, so it's most likely that they were some foreign affairs issues of some type. But of course, we do know, or we have heard through reporting, that some of these documents were SCI, which is special compartmentalized information, which means that these documents are supposed to be highly secure. They're only supposed to be seen in a SCIF or a secure compartmentalized location. You're not supposed to be able to just take them home with you. So it's a problem for him politically,
I guess,
even if it's not legal.
I guess you're right. I guess the steps that President Biden has taken, right, informing the DOJ appointing a special counsel, submitting those documents to the National Archive, these are all steps taken in the right direction.
Absolutely.
Right.
That's right.
But do you think that any way it was hidden or kept away from the public domain for some time because of political reasons?
Because of what?
Because of any political reasons?
I think so. I think there was politics involved. I mean, of course, there are legal implications too. And President Biden had almost indicated, he said, I want to talk about it more, as though there were some political or legal reasons why they couldn't actually get into what the documents were or why. And of course, these documents, if they were SCI, if they were indeed SCI, they're so secure that you're not even supposed to talk about what they were about. So at the same time, we're at a standing still. But there is there are two stories here, two special counsels looking at two different presidents now of documents being taken. But there are differences. I mean, one president stonewalled, he fought. He said that that they had no documents, and turned out to be hundreds of these. Another president, from what appears to be, called up the National Archives, returned the documents immediately, notified the proper authorities.
When we spoke here last time, it was a big image, a winning image for the President Biden, right? The 2022 was a big thing. He scored on all the major points, legislations, elections, the image, the functioning of the government. Does 2023 starts with not on the right direction? Or what implications this do you think is going to have on the 2024 elections, or is it too early to say?
Well, everything's too early because you never know. Things can, politics to predict is very difficult. We thought that Jeb Bush was going to be the front runner in 2016, and he was tossed out by some guy from New York. Now, the thing is, though, is that Democratic strategists are shaking their heads. They're looking at this going, how did this happen? Why did this happen? We know Joe Biden didn't mean to do this, but how possibly could you have even let this have occurred? He remembered what happened to Hillary Clinton in her emails, where there had been so many officials that were using their private emails. Colin Powell, for instance, had been using a private email server. Nobody really questioned that. Now, he didn't run for president, but there had been so many people that were using private email because actually the government's email system was really broken. It was very difficult to use. But that didn't become the dialogue. The dialogue was that she was sloppy with classified material, and it had a huge impact upon the election. And that Biden and his team are worried that this could have the same impact. And we know that Democratic strategists are terribly worried about that.
I think we can leave this discussion about the documents for the time being to the politicians and the investigators who are looking into it, why it happened, how it happened, where it landed, and how crucial these documents were. But one thing is more important right now here. The classification of these documents, the manner it is being done. Neither me nor you have seen what kind of document these are.
That's right.
But what we've heard is that a lot of publicly available information which you could do on Google search, right? Or on newspapers, other things you can see. these are still being classified in government domain. The
That's right.
Classified in sensitive categories. There is a need to relook into the ways in which the government documents are being classified.
You are absolutely correct on that. You are absolutely right. I mean, right now there are over 200,000 people that can classify documents. How many secrets can one possibly hold? Fact is, a CIA analyst told me many years ago, she said most of the information that the CIA gets is from reading newspapers, from looking at the news. Because, you know, you can understand a lot from just understanding what's going on. That's why news is so important.
So moving away to the next topic,
Yes.
Another major topic here today is the debt ceiling, right?
Right.
Treasury Secretary wrote a letter to the congressional leadership about the impending debt crisis on January 19th.
Right.
Can you tell us about it?
Well, Janet Yellen, she knows that this Republican House majority is intent upon using the debt ceiling. They've already stated this as a lever to extract concessions, such that they saying, all right, we will only agree to raising the debt ceiling if you, President Biden and Democratic majority in the Senate, agree to spending cuts. One lawmaker called this called it a form of terrorism, a form of threat. Janet Yellen, in her letter, said if the United States defaults on the debt, it would be the first time in U.S. history, and it would have catastrophic impact on the world economy. So it's
have a big impact on the world economy. We have seen this story play again and again, where there's always a political clash between the ruling and the opposition party, the debt ceiling here,
that was the invention of Newt Gingrich, was to do that, was to use the debt ceiling as a...
But hopefully, I think everything will survive. U.S. is not going to default, and the world economy will. It's already in a bad shape. It shouldn't go much worse, right?
No, I mean, the thing is that here's the problem, and that is when you have people who are true believers, who are just radical, which are some on the far right are in Congress, and we see it on both sides, by the way. You'll see these kind of radicals that will willing to do anything to get their agenda. But they represent a tiny minority of what the vast majority of people want. The vast majority want Congress just to do its job, just to pay the bills, get things running on time. That's it. So we're hopeful that there will be no disruption. It's critically important.
I think we should end today's conversation on a nice note. It's about the tradition of world's oldest democracy. Right, well, the most elected leader of the country goes and addresses the Congress every year.
Right.
Despite any kind of political dysfunctionality, the House Speaker has invited President Biden for addressing the joint session of the U.S. Congress.
February 7th, which is always a Tuesday. It's a big deal, and I've sat in the chamber many years watching the President giving that. It's a huge ceremony. I mean, they're marched down, the Senate, everything is done with such with a sense of honor almost for this event. It's a big event.
If you remember the last few years, how the State of the Union address has been seen. The last 2 years, the two women sitting ahead on top of the dais, right?
Yeah.
The Vice President and the House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi. Before that, you had seen when there was a clash, right, with the Speaker and the President.
Sure, she tore up. Yeah.
I think how do you see it's going to happen this year?
I don't think it's going to be quite that. First of all, President Biden isn't bombastic. He does not want to create conflict or say things that are, even though he is trying to be bipartisan, he is trying his very best to figure out how he can work together, even though he knows that House Oversight is intent upon investigating his son, Hunter Biden, and using it as a lever to attack him. Even though he knows that there are threats to the debt ceiling, he still wants to work with this Congress. And so the last thing President Biden wants to do is create more friction. Now, he does want to, I'm sure that this State of the Union is going to reiterate how important it is for the United States to support Ukraine in its defense against Russia, because some of the House majority have said that they are not going to issue a blank check anymore to Ukraine, which might be a veiled threat to say, well, we're not going to really support Ukraine going forward.
Well, this is going to be an occasion where President Biden will give a review or the key highlight the achievements of his administration 2 years and what's going to do in the next 2 years.
Right.
On
What a
that
pleasure.
note, let's conclude.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.